Hello there. Homer Simpson was one of television's greatest ever characters. Obviously that's very subjective, but I'm convinced that it's true. Of course, some people still find it difficult to accept that cartoons can and should be taken that seriously, and I imagine that those people have left already. Well, I suspect that they never clicked on the video to begin with, but that's besides the point. And for many others, I'm sure that this idea will seem ridiculous because The Simpsons has infamously been pretty woeful for quite a long time now, but for 10 years or so it was truly one of the best shows on television, and at the centre of that status, like with so many great series, was a man wrestling with his flaws and trying his hardest to feed his family in suburban America. A lot has been made of how Homer Simpson's character has changed over time, with people going back to series 4 or 6 or 8 and pointing to him as someone who was a lot more caring and loving of his family, who lived on the edge of collapse because he hadn't yet been afforded the physical and financial immortality that he gained over the course of 34 years of animation, and who had real human relationships with his friends, family, co-workers and boss. These figures in his life who hadn't yet been through the process of endless exaggeration and flanderization. A phenomenon that's characterized by fictional people whose personalities become cartoonishly overstated over time, and which is literally named after Homer's next-door neighbour Ned Flanders. But for me, despite the show being at the height of its critical acclaim and cultural relevance throughout the 1990s, and despite the fact that the execution of his personality as a consistent known entity is a lot better in the seasons to follow, for me, Homer's later character, and in fact every other character in every other television series, both before and since, has failed to surpass the brilliance of Season 1 Homer Simpson. I think it's fair to say that Season 1 of The Simpsons stands as something of a rough diamond, quality and accessibility-wise. It doesn't have the refined watchability of the show's golden years, and its characters, animations and story notes are a lot less settled at the beginning of the series that they would later become. It's experimental by comparison to the image of The Simpsons that I'm betting you have in your head, being far less restricted to any agreed upon style, and that really shows when you watch it with a knowledge of what it would go on to become. Characters changed, voices changed, everything was still in motion, and it's a fascinating watch for that reason.
To see you. Glad you could make it.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Burns. I'm so glad you invited us.
Not me. I had to miss Little League for this.
We are in the future. We know what this is going to become. To us, it's the highest grossing animated show of all time, a media empire built on the back of this one family. But to them, back then, it's the start of something completely new. This is exemplified by some of the most glaring differences to later seasons that we notice upon travelling back in time. Skinner's skin colour and Barney's hair are completely different in their first appearances than they are down the road. Mr. Burns' personality deflanderizes itself from a cantankerous supervillain to any old shitty boss at work. And every B-list character's voice becomes less recognisable and idiosyncratic, instead taking on a more uniform register that is indicative of those early episodes. And Homer's personality is similarly volatile as he finds his feet and his place in this world. Not only is Homer's voice a little off by comparison to the recognisable tones of the future, but he is erratic and undecided in his personality, to a point where it becomes the key facet of his character. Despite his core motivation being a strong love of his family, he is reliably unreliable, both to those who love him and to the viewer. In one episode, he turns away from small-town stardom and the admiration of his co-workers, two elements that he so clearly relishes, because he feels the need to teach his son a lesson about declining to be disloyal and treat women as objects, a lesson that he knows he's learned all too late in his life, and that he wishes to impart upon his son from an early age. And then that episode is immediately followed by him wildly celebrating when that same son is sent to live in misery for 3 months in rural France. In classical tragedies, a hamartia is a fatal flaw that leads to the downfall of the protagonist, be it hubris or jealousy or anything else along those lines. Homer at this point has a clear hamartia, and it's one that's built into the foundations of his character even after 30 years of evolution. His imperfection is his inconsistency. The difference between his distracted, uncaring actions and his warm, loving heart so often residing at the centre of his woes, which build to a point rarely, if ever, seen elsewhere in this kind of popular family-friendly fiction, as he hits a very literal visualization of rock bottom in the 3rd episode, fittingly titled Homer's Odyssey. Homer, his acquaintances, and his persona cannot die, leaving him in a state that I would describe as hamartia in perpetuity. Instead of taking place across the course of one single tragedy, Homer has been in freefall at least once every couple of episodes since the show began back in 1989. It's like he's in Dr. Marvin Monroe's familial shock therapy, and every time he allows himself to do something selfish or motivated by vice, he gets one big long shock from each member of his family. And given that he has very little self-control or positive outside influence, that happens at a rate that, mercifully, would have turned his brain to an unfeeling mush after just a few episodes. And although Homer's emotional pain is never dulled by any of those hundreds of times that he let his family down, I suppose what I'm getting at is that after a few seasons, it no longer feels genuine to the viewer. The Simpsons are shunted into immortality as their age, status, and economic situation could not change once the viewers have become so accustomed to them, and that eliminated all of the risk that there once was. In season 1, it really seems possible that Marge might go off and have an affair, that Homer might lose his job on a permanent basis, that Lisa might not get to go to college, and that Bart might be expelled or sent to military school. And all of those burdens lay heavily across Homer's shoulders in a way that's just no longer true. And that's a huge part of why Homer was so much better when he was so much more fragile, when all of these struggles were only just becoming known. In terms of Homer's own beliefs and tribulations, he also felt a lot more complex at this time. In the episode There's No Disgrace Like Home, he seemed to be increasingly frustrated by his family and what he sees as their shortcomings by comparison to the seemingly simpler and more fine-tuned lives of the rest of Springfield. But he's also generally shown to be terrified of losing any one element of the time that he spends with them, splashing his newfound cash at the end of the episode on the one thing that unites the family every single time they're about to go off on another adventure, the television. And he does so even as he still smoulders from the electroshock therapy that each and every one of them willingly put him through. In other episodes, he's horrified to think that Marge might be drifting away from him when she takes up bowling after he fails her on her birthday, and chooses to die side by side with Bart after his son becomes the target of a literal lynch mob. And not for the final time either. Not sure how I would cope if my primary school teacher had attended multiple lynch mobs calling for my head.
You are surprisingly well adjusted.
Now, you might think that, although both quite extreme situations, what with Marge's potential affair and Bart invoking the wrath of vigilante justice, Homer's reactions in these situations are what we would expect of any half-decent husband or father. But that's also why these moments shine. Homer isn't some beacon of love and perfection, nor a monument to hatred or inadequacy, but rather a regular man doing his best to be the best that he can be, feeling all the love and anger that any of us do, despite the constant disappointments that emerge from his actions, and trying to shape that into something better. Sometimes he gets it just right, whilst in other moments, especially if the episode hasn't yet reached its conclusion, he's going to be incredibly misguided. And this perhaps is demonstrated at its most extreme when he becomes unemployed and, feeling like a burden to his family after breaking open his 10-year-old son's piggy bank, decides to take his own life so that he'll never again try to steal from someone that he loves. And that's Bart, his greatest tormentor, whom he's expressing such anguish over hurting. I think that it's important to remember his upbringing here. He's the product of a mother who, reasoning aside, abandoned him with an emotionally abusive father, and the subsequently lackluster developmental years that came with that fact. Adding to that he fell from grace in his younger years after promising to excel in a number of fields, and what we have is a man who's working hard every day to build a better life for the people he loves, hoping to help them reach their maximum potential in a home with a father who can provide for them, rather than hinder them as he may feel that his own did for him. Homer doesn't want to become the father who yells at his children if they underachieve, and he especially doesn't want to be the father who still yells at them if they don't. He has the desire to stick with his family at all costs, because any instance of them leaving him, or vice versa, only brings about the memories of his own suffering as a child. And, whilst he has some of the traits of his father, he spends his time struggling to pronounce his love for his family through the use of the tools that his arduous upbringing has provided him. I really love the Simpsons movie, but going back to it now, the great line of
"And I've really come to like you guys,"
spoken to his family as they threatened to part ways with him, doesn't feel at all true to either Homer's original inability to express his feelings for his family, or the roots of those feelings themselves. Given his proclivity for yelling at his daughter, or even strangling his son, it's easy to view Homer as someone who despises the little things that his family do. But in this first season of what was once a spectacular show, it's plain to see that he loves and remembers and appreciates the little things, like the comfort of Marge's breath on the back of his neck as she sleeps, or the fact that the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that she makes for his packed lunch don't spill out sticky, messy food all over his hands, as everyone else's sandwiches seem to do for them, which is a fact that, when pushed to desperation as Marge teeters on the edge of leaving him for good, he uses as a means of expressing feelings that he can't articulate, successfully communicating his feelings about her in a manner that he so frequently fails to achieve, and certainly succeeding in bringing a tear to my eye, I'm not afraid to admit. Homer as a fictional character is made so much stronger at this stage by each and every one of his weaknesses, which are at their most devastating, for me, in Season 1. Furthermore, he reinforces his character so effectively with the strengths that he utilises to overcome those flaws. And I know that this is something that so many characters do, and that it doesn't really mean anything when I say that I promise that he does it better than anyone else, but all I can say at this point is that Season 1 Homer makes me the perfect PB&J sandwich every day, and that I'm always devastated when I reach the end of that run and have to see him walk away. And I don't think that you can ask much more of him than that. Thanks for watching. Have you seen the first series of The Simpsons? Did you have any thoughts on Homer's character at this time, and how it changes throughout the years? Do you know what your favourite series of The Simpsons is, or maybe you prefer the movie or one of the games? Please do let me know in the comments below, and I'll be sure to read and reply to each and every response that this video gets. So thanks again for making it to the end of this video, and I hope to see you next time.